Hello, my name is Beverly Rayner. I'm the gallery director and curator at Cabrillo Gallery. I'm joined today by Victoria May, who is the art gallery coordinator. Thank you for joining us for Deeper Waters, Navigating Our Place in the World. This is the first of two artist talks for our current exhibition at Cabrillo Gallery, Navigators, Art, Photography, Art History, Faculty and Staff exhibition. In this talk, 6 current and retired faculty and staff will talk about their artwork in the Navigators exhibition. Now I'm going to share the screen for our slideshow. Okay. Right. So the Navigators exhibition is a faculty and staff exhibition. We have a faculty exhibition every year in the gallery. Sometimes it's a sabbatical show. Sometimes it's an exhibition that honors recent retirees. And most often it's a group show like this one that features all of the faculty and staff in the art area, art and photography area at Cabrillo. This year we have just over 30 artists in the show in multiple media. The theme this year reflects the challenges we've all had to face navigating the world as it is these days in this really difficult year, especially for educators such as our presenters today, who have found it a lot of challenges they've had to navigate, and they've had to work incredibly hard to figure out how to teach online. If you'd like to see all of the work in the Navigators exhibition, you can go to the Cabrillo Gallery website, and the link to the page for the exhibition is on the screen. It can be viewed through the online gallery that's on this page link. And also there are some videos in the exhibition, and there are links to those videos on this page. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Today's talk is titled Deeper Waters, Navigating Our Place in the World. These artists will talk about their work that in one way or another explores ideas of sense of self, sense of belonging, or finding a workable path through the ever-changing situations we face living in the world today. I'm going to introduce the artists first. Sylvia Rios has an MFA in sculpture from San Francisco State University and did postgraduate studies towards an MA in art education at San Jose State University, where she has a Bachelor of Arts degree with a minor in music. Greg Mettler, oops, I'm sorry. Sylvia has been a ceramics instructor at Cabrillo for 16 years. Greg Mettler has an MFA in photography from San Jose State University. He has a biology with minor in art at Humboldt State University. And he has been at Cabrillo Gallery Cabrillo College for 12 years. And he's the co-chair of the photography department. Sean Peeler has an MFA in photography from San Jose State University, a BA in art studio from California State University in Chico, and has been a Cabrillo photography instructor since 2019. Carmina Eliason has an MFA in photography from San Jose State University, a BA in cultural anthropology from CSU Monterey Bay, and has been teaching photography at Cabrillo for 2 years. Lesley Louden has an MFA in photography at Cranbrook, an MA in photo media at UNSW in Sydney, Australia, and a BFA in photography from Ohio Wesleyan University. She has been teaching photography at Cabrillo for 12 years. She was very recently hired as our full-time photography instructor. And she's also a co-chair of the photography department. Andrea Borsuk has an MFA from Columbia University, a BFA from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and has been teaching painting, drawing, mixed media at Cabrillo for 15 years. And our first presenter is Sylvia Rios. Take it away, Sylvia.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm happy to be here and share a little bit about my process in making lanterns. It started for me after, as an instructor, trying to do throne sculpture, in part for Sculpture Is at the Sierra Azul nursery, and also through trying to encourage my students to create and be adventuresome in experimenting with forms, even though they didn't have the ability to throw large pieces. So I devised this method as a way for them to make small pieces and using skills they didn't realize they had, then stack them up and build them. So this lantern here, I made separately, but what it is various different forms, bottom to top. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces that are thrown, each one out of a similar amount of clay. And they're thrown with a diameter that is the same at the base that it is at the top. So anything can happen in between. And then as they're leather hard, they're trimmed and measured and fitted and centered from top to bottom, because they have a tendency to wave like this as you're putting them together. And then they're joined. The top part where you see the candle inside is a lidded container. And the top part above that, which looks like a handle of some sort or a finial, is also wheel thrown. So I kind of sneak up on people when I ask them to make these forms, because they're they think they don't know, they can't do it, and then little by little they can. And for me, a lantern is kind of an important thing to have. I enjoy doing work for outside, but it is a challenge when you're throwing on the wheel to do forms. And I wanted to do something that was not a typical totem, where you make individual pieces and stack them up. So in a way, this expression came about through a function that I wanted it to fill. And so I've experimented and I've played and I've kind of enjoyed it. Used different glazes. Some of the glazes break on the thinner areas. This glaze is reads green to black. And where it lands and gets a thicker layer, it'll turn green. Where the texture cuts through, you get black. And so it's kind of fun to make a piece knowing what kind of glaze you're going to use so that you can make the piece to interact with the glaze. And so again, a similar format in terms of how I throw and assemble the different pieces, and still, some variation there. I've done some that are quite large. These are about 3 feet to 2 feet tall, and they tend to be relatively narrow. But we have a couple of slides coming that show views of a larger piece as well. In this piece, it has some experimentation with colored slips. The middle section has a dark engobe on it with some sgraffito decoration. So in essence, I can sit down with, 8 or 9 or 10 pieces of clay that are all about, anywhere from 1 to 3 pounds, and have fun. It's kind of like, I think of it as a jazz improvisation. I used to do bells, where I'd sit down with a hump of clay and throw off the mound and make a crazy shape, cut it off and set it aside, and then come back to it later. And I'd spend, a morning or an afternoon throwing these shapes and come back. And this is kind of what this is like too, because it's more playful. And yet I know that they're going to be assembled into lanterns, and there's some technical challenges that make it worth doing for me. And I don't know, they're just kind of fun. So makes it kind of a delightful moment. This is one of the one of the first ones that I did, and I wanted it to be more like a wood turning. So depending on what you're thinking and what you like, they can have different personalities. Some of the previous ones were the Shino is a traditional Japanese glaze that looks very amber and glowy. Um, the first one was more of a rocky one. And then this one, I like it because it reminds me of a bronze surface. So having these very simple vertical thrust and then having a nice spherical lantern in the top. And then the holes are perforated with a very cool tool that looks like a Christmas tree. It has a fine tip at the top, and then gradually it widens to make a larger space, and then it widens some more. So you can see down the middle where the candle is showing that the holes get larger and smaller. So that becomes another kind of fun doodle in opportunity to experiment with design and shape and light, in fact. The knob at the top, the finial at the top, is designed to serve as a lid, but I have found that I'd rather not touch them there. So luckily they all have a wide rim, and I pick them up from the rim because if they're hot, you'll end up dropping the lid. So kind of a user beware sort of moment. Let it cool down before you try to pick it up. But I also like the way glazes catch, especially on this one, on the horizontal ridges. This one is a larger piece. It's about, probably close to 6 feet tall. It was installed in Sierra Sul. The piece on the left is in their gardens, and the piece on the right, the installation on the right is at my home. And on this one, I left the pieces separate, which gave me more freedom because being this size and weight, it would have been impossible to lift. The lanterns are portable. Anybody can pick them up and move them in their entirety. But this one, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sections. And each one is about 4 or 5 pounds, depending on what I decided to do with it. And they don't have to be the same weight for any reason, except that design-wise, it gives you an opportunity to take a breath in between. But this one was fired to cone 6 and just sponged on effects. And when you walk around it, the color changes kind of to emulate the way moss grows on a surface and the way shadow creates, just to enhance the volume a little bit. And there's a dove at the top. You can see the dove a little more clearly on the left. And it was a memorial that we installed for a short period at the Davis conference. Gail Ritchie teaches a class, and I typically join in and encourage my students to do so as well, to become one of the many. And these are some really fun student pieces. People who thought they couldn't do it, picked up clay, did it, and yeah, they may not be absolutely perfect, and with a little more practice, they will get better, but I thought they had a good time. And they did too. They were very proud of their lanterns.
Okay, Greg.
Hello. I hope you guys can hear me okay.
Yep.
So I'm Greg Mettler. I teach here at Cabrillo. I also teach at MPC. And the art piece that I submitted to this exhibition is a new video recently completed. All right.
Greg, do you want to speak over it so we can stick with our timeline?
I'm not going to speak that much afterwards, so maybe we'll just watch it and I'll speak shortly. That's better though, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
We've been trying all kinds of things. Wonderful. Thank you for doing that, Greg.
Oh, you're welcome. You guys see my face now? Okay, so that was a movie made up of entirely of cyanotypes. There was over 950 cyanotypes that made up that video. And it was kind of a culmination of the classes I was teaching. So I was teaching history of photography, where we were looking at like Edward Muybridge's Running Horse and early Thomas Edison movies. And I was really interested in that idea of early motion picture and that way of looking at images and kind of that very early on. And then I was also teaching alternative processes in photography at MPC, and my students were making cyanotypes, and we were working a lot with making digital negatives and creating cyanotypes. And then I was also teaching video art. So we were working with Premiere and editing and making short videos that were little projects that were, you know, a couple minutes long as opposed to big cinema type projects. So it's the three of those things together. So I was editing a lot of video, I was making a lot of alternative process prints, and then I was studying all these old early motion pictures. So I thought, like, I think I can make a video of all cyanotypes. But then I had to figure out how I'm going to do it. How am I going to make all these individual handmade prints and then scan them all and then create it all together? And it ended up working out really well and came all together. So I had to print each. So I shot digitally, and then I took that minute of digital video, and then I took the frames and exported all the frames as black and white negatives. And then I had all of those, and then I took each one of those and printed them out as transparencies, and then made a cyanotype for each frame in the clip. And then once I made the cyanotype, I scanned all of the cyanotypes and then put them back into Premiere, and then replaced the original frame in the video that I shot with the frame, the cyanotype frame, and then aligned it, and then put the audio back in, the original audio that was in the original movie. So it basically replaced all of the digital images from the digital video file with a cyanotype. And it took me about 9 months to make a minute of video, which was a lot of work, but I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I'm like I said, my influences would be Muybridge, but also I really love like William Kentridge and his type of work, you know, where he's drawing and erasing and shooting a frame and drawing and erasing, and that kind of how it kind of builds. And I love the way the chemistry moves along the edges and the way it's always changing, and it's got a handmade feel, but yet that digital video kind of comes out of the blue and then back. And then in terms of what the video is about, I originally made it, it was kind of around my idea of aging and a little bit about isolation and being alone, but that was my original intent, was pre-COVID. And then when I finished it, it was in the middle of COVID, and then I'm like, well, maybe I'll just let people see it how they want to see it. It's definitely got a feeling of isolation, the person coming out of the darkness and then going back in. And I figured people could probably relate to this idea of feeling isolated and kind of lost and moving in and out of the darkness. So I think it was kind of the right timing to be able to put it out. It's also fun to do video art right now because you can share it with people online really easily, you know, as opposed to, you know, create something like a beautiful 3D project. And then it's like, I'm going to take 20 pictures of it. And you can see it from all these different angles, but it's so different than like being in the room, something that has an aura that you want to revolve around and look at and hold and touch and feel, you know, so it's kind of fun to do video art right now. So I guess that's all I have to share. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for playing that video well. We're going back to the slideshow now. Is it still on optimized video, Vic? It looks pixelated again. Oh, there we go. Thank you. All right, and next up is Sean Peeler.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I was really excited to speak to you guys about this project that I completed in 2019. The project was titled Smile, You're on Camera. And it's a project that on its surface at least investigates the evolving practice of portrait photography and the entanglements between advertisement and photographic culture. So this was the piece that I submitted for the show. And this was a tintype selfie that I made in in a grouping with a bunch of found studio tintypes from the 19th century. And so it was really just, the project began as a bundle of curiosities about the culture of popular photography, and particularly what influences the photograph subject, and why is that today compared to the 19th century. You can go to the next slide, please. This is a detailed shot of one of those found tintypes, which is, you know, stunning, beautiful. But when I saw these tintypes, to me, there's really a sense of like dry, deadpan humor to me. Like I look at them as comedic because of how radically different and uncomfortable these children look to be photographed. And the contrast between that and what we see today as photographs of children, how they're represented in photography, was both fascinating, but also personally quite funny. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this project, there was multiple threads of investigation, and I really approached sort of my primary concept from multiple angles and multiple medias. And so part of the project, in the case of, I have 2 studio portraits, and they're sort of anti-portraits, and we see one of those examples here, which is just a large digital photographic inkjet print that I made, a self-portrait of myself in the studio. And during this time, I was thinking about how people are portrayed in advertisement, and sort of the like ever gazing and surveilling nature of photography and videography in today's sort of human experience. And I just wanted to make sort of funny, bizarre, and absurd portraits in the studio that did everything they could to actually conceal who was actually being photographed, to be a form of self-censorship to preserve privacy. Next slide, please. The next slide is just a second studio portrait that I made, sort of anti-portrait, that was, in this case, sort of the simplest way of avoiding the camera and its documentation of the person sitting in the studio. The yellow background was influenced by what I'll talk about next, which is Eastman Kodak Company, which was the inventor of the first affordable handheld camera in the 19th century, or the late 19th century. And because of that, they became the leading authority in photography and effectively educated the first generation of amateur photographers in America. If you could go to the next slide, please. Portrayed in Kodak's advertisements, training manuals, and trade journals were people smiling joyously, excluding the possibility of anything but affirmation of a photographic practice that is fun, easy, and essential for any occasion. What we're looking at here is the first result that came up when I typed smiling into Adobe stock photography. And I thought it was quite beautiful and perfect because never so obviously was there the connection between happiness in photography and consumption. So we see 2 women online shopping, and the only sort of criteria for how I found this image in Adobe stock photography was smiling. So this is a small cyanotype, or a blueprint, the original blueprint technology. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. Because of Eastman Kodak Company and what continues to be the case with the way in which these photography companies advertise their products, the experience of the photographed subject and the practice of photography was successfully pre-constructed and packaged. Popular photography in its infancy becomes an extension of advertising culture. Embedded in the practice are strategies for selling products, desirable lifestyles, and consumer happiness. This was sort of tongue-in-cheek, playful, and evokes the idea of saying cheese for a photograph, which is an absurd thing to say in itself, but was further fascinating when I discovered that the first licensed portrait photographer in London in 1841 would actually instruct his subjects, portrait subjects, to say prunes for their portraits, because prunes would prim the lips and present the face in a way that was culturally acceptable during the Victorian era, which smiling in public in the Victorian era was seen as undesirable. and something that people that possess the least cultural capital would do. So children would smile in public, people who were drunk, working class people, people who weren't civilized would smile. So part of this project was playing with the different food products that we've used in photography to get a specific cultural conduct in front of the camera again. So I took a studio photograph of a package of American cheese. You go to the next slide, please. Smile, you're on camera. This was this is a wet plate photograph, a contact wet plate on a sheet of mirror. And so when you look at this piece, you see the reflection of yourself within the letters that say smile, you're on camera. Smile, you're on camera, it comes from the more ominous sort of surveillance culture of photography. It's kind of ominous in the sense that someone who's telling you that they're spying on you is also telling you to appear happy while doing so. I think there's something kind of dark and sinister in that. And so certainly part of this project, underlying it, there's a real sort of dystopian, ominous tone that looks akin to some kind of science fiction where people are no longer capable of controlling themselves and lose agency and are completely directed by the photographer, and the culture of photography losing themselves in the process. Next slide, please. And so this is a small installation shot of some of the work. And so we looked at part of this project. I didn't have time or interest to talk about every single piece, but this is an installation shot of part of this project at Root Division Gallery. And you can see the way in which with the limitations of space, how I chose to exhibit the project. And you also can see the scale of particular pieces. On the far right, there's prunes, and there's also pruning shears, and that work interacts with that saying prunes historical anecdote from Richard Beard in 1841. And that's all I have for you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. All right, next up is Carmina. Carmina, you're muted. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, let's go.
Did that work?
Yes, now you're here. Okay.
All right. I'm glad to have that affirmation because I'm never sure if I'm really here or not. Like living in my computer now. Hey everyone. I have a lot to say, so I wrote it down. So I'll be reading. What I want to talk about is about the piece that's in the middle of the screen. So the garment that you see that I'm wearing is called a huipil. The huipil is a style of tunic that has a long history in communities throughout Central America, and it's been adopted and adapted throughout Mexico and the Mexican diaspora as a symbol of cultural belonging. They're made for different purposes: everyday wear, ceremonial, patriotic holidays, tourist souvenirs, and it's the function as of a tourist object that was the most interesting for me for this project. As I was creating this piece, I was exploring the tension between connection and distance I feel from my inherited cultures. My mom is from Mexico, and my dad's grandparents are from Sweden, but raised primarily in California. So I have this tension between how I experience culture, and I often feel like a tourist to my own heritage. So to make the dress, I took apart a huipil that my sister-in-law gave me that she had bought as a tourist in Central America. And I took it apart and used the panels like a darkroom negative on panels of cotton treated with cyanotype. And then I sewed everything back together again. I'm gonna read you an excerpt from a performance that I did with these panels. And in the images, you'll see other cotton panels that I photogrammed with objects from my home that hold stories for me that connect me to my great-grandmothers from Sweden and Mexico. My stories have trouble being born. They catch in my throat and want to stay buried rather than spoken out loud. It's easier to immerse myself in other people's stories because sometimes I can't remember my own. And then when I do remember, they are mixed up and out of order. Fragments blur and blend together. Sometimes they are only fraying threads. The small scraps are difficult to hold on to, escaping in the air. To keep them with me, I bind them together. I draw the thread in and out, and the patchwork memories begin to take a shape. The shape is a skirt, and it's made of stories and of star travel. There are memories, textbook histories, family stories, TV shows, movies, photographs, stitched together with threads of my life, of my ancestors' lives, of future children's lives, of things I know, as well as things I am, but don't know that I am. I think of my great-grandmother who traveled alone from Sweden to America as a child. Amongst strangers, a ship carried her and her sister through the Atlantic, no parents, no guardians, navigating a strange place. There was no one at the train station when they arrived, and somehow they found their family. And somehow I panic when my phone runs out of batteries and I don't have directions on my drive to Oakland. I think of my Mexican ancestors and of their ancestors who lived before there was a Mexico. Was one of my grandmothers raped by a colonizer? Maybe it was love. Maybe it was a marriage of convenience, or maybe no marriage at all, just survival and existence. Who were they? What did they eat? What were they like? Were they happy? Did they die from the heat in the desert, or did their villages and communities die out from European disease? What were their stories? It's a lost self, a place of mystery, an unknown star that I traveled up from and have forgotten. And yet I survived. I feel guilty for surviving, for living in my home next to the trees, with the shade and the birds, the produce that's delivered weekly in clean cardboard boxes, for clean water from the tap. I feel guilty, I feel taken care of. Is this white guilt or the guilt of survival? I am the colonizer and the colonized. My mothers, my grandmothers, and my great-grandmothers helped me make this skirt. I inherited their worn and dusty patches of stories. I inherited their pain, their joy, their love, and their loss. My skirt contains within it a patchwork of selves unknown, with selves forgotten, selves that are separated. This is the skirt I wear. Its invisible threads, patchwork memories, and stories continually being mended, stitched together, integrated, broken again, and then stitched together once more.
Thank you, Carmina. I assume you're done?
Yes, thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Next up is Lesley Louden.
Hi everyone, Carmina, I loved your words and your work and everyone. So these photographs that I made were quite comforting and accessible and easy for me to make during the early stages of the shelter in place. But when it came time to share the photographs, related back to what these were actually hard for me to share. They were quite different than the photographs that I was used to seeing growing up, and of homes and of personal spaces. And so I decided to, like with a lot of my work, ask myself, why was that? Why did it feel uncomfortable? This is obviously why you're exploring it and taking photographs of it. And I realized that it was different to see my private life at home, which was obviously very, very separate because of, you know, things like we didn't use Zoom at home all the time. And so these images of my public and private life were always, my private life was kind of kept separate from my public life at work, and even separate a lot of times from my kids and family at school. So also these photographs didn't look like the home life that were shared with me when I was growing up. And this was all, of course, before social media and Zoom calls. So the photos of homes and families that I saw growing up were highly shiny views in magazines and on television, except for those in family albums. But those snapshots were mostly of smiling faces during my time period of growing up in the 80s and 90s. And they were kept in private closed albums in families, you know, homes on the shelves. And my mom reminded me of this because she said that, you know, we didn't print a lot of photos back then. And to print a photo, it was kind of a precious thing. So you only wanted to print, she said, certain images. And I said, well, that's kind of what I'm questioning is, why did you want to print certain images? So that still brought this question for me: why certain photos? Are there photo cliches from our culture? And so did these images I had in my mind set photographic goalposts that felt like I was meant to strive to be an adult? But my photos that I'd recently created at home that you're all looking at were so different, and at the same time went along with my philosophy that one must consciously add photographs to the visual conversation, now completely online, especially during COVID, to shaping our world. Surrounding myself and others with the real life I wanted to see felt essential for comfort, a comfort that I craved and that gave me a sense of trust in the future, that there is power in so radical vulnerability was something I already started to do with new friends and my students in my classes, where we share things about our lives and asking about their lives and families and things that sometimes. So I decided that when we share our own real lives with others, we combat the perfect, the sense of control, the false media news and consumerist machine that seems to have only a few idealized spots saved for hardly anyone. These are all things that I positively believe that young already put their own real lives out there on social media. And I find that really beautiful. I even had this question come to my mind last year: is the grime beautiful too? And I realized this past weekend when I was thinking about it, that the grime isn't always beautiful too, but sharing it is. So these photographs are meant to share my actual life, my perspective, and a physical representation of my mental state. And the beauty that I had to find for my own sanity was a kind of real perfect in some good messes, shown in these photographs of everyday life at my house gone awry. But I'd rather say gone.
Are you done?
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. I liked as you were talking, your daughter kept appearing and disappearing out of the thin air. Literally.
Leslie,
So
what
fitting.
was the last line? Your sound was breaking up.
Oh, it was. Okay, so.
Line again, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, grime hit all at once. And the beauty that I had to find for my own sanity was a kind of real perfect in some good messes, shown in these photographs of everyday life at my house, gone real.
I think we got more of it that time. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Andrea Borsuk.
Hi. Last but not least, hi. Let's see. Okay. This is not my everyday life. As opposed to Leslie's, this has nothing to do with my everyday life, but in many ways it is something I have been thinking about, and I think we're all thinking about, the idea of who's holding the strings of fate. And this is a painting that I did in 2011. And the characters in this painting are invented composites of cliches of women in various get-up safety devices, and surrounded by each other as a team on a string that's being held by we don't know who. These paintings that I did at this time referenced the three sisters of fate. One who creates the string of life, one who determines how long it is, and the other sister who cuts it. And so I was inventing jewelry that held and was affected by the winds of fate and the weather. And within each painting, there were signs of the fateful phone call.
Dude, I forgot.
What? Who just said that? Oh, I don't know. So using different symbols of caution, of timing, of our inability to maybe appear with a proper device that will save our lives, we are left hoping that something good is going to happen and luck will go our way. Next slide. That's a zoom in of that. Next one. So with this idea of people, women working in teams together with their construction hats on and safety vests, and little jewels for luck or reminders that death is near or approaching eventually. These paintings were really consuming me because I was worried about who was in charge. And so next slide. Let's see what this next one is. And so fast forward to COVID, and the ladies have returned, but they're isolated. They're not working in teams anymore. And I didn't really even realize this until after I was done with this series. These were mixed media pieces that I was working on. And a lot of the figures came out of a variety of isolated figures of these women who are mostly self-portraits, I guess, who are responding to the environment and contorting their bodies to adapt to this new environment, where the other ones were more surrounded by maybe a more logical landscape. These are indeterminate landscapes. And the new symbols, the new charms, are oxygen masks in this case. Next slide. And so this would be the one that's included in this show. And once again, she's not held by the jewelry anymore. She's sort of floating in her own, on her own island. And I kind of look at these as toxic gardens, thinking about the environments that don't feel organic at all, that the skies aren't even the right blue anymore. And the apparati that are dangling, the new jewelry, are the oxygen masks. And the image of the woman is pretty much evident how I feel right now. When's it going to end? Am I going to be able to breathe? Those are my questions.
And on that note, yes, I think we're all in the same boat, Andrea. So now it's time for some Q&A. You can, if you don't want to talk, you can add your questions to the chat. But if you do want to actually speak your question, then please wave your hand around for a while until we find you, because we have to look for you in the multiple grids. And then once we find you, you can unmute yourself when we call on you. So does anybody, are there any questions in the chat, Vic? I'm going to start looking through. Does somebody have a question?
SFSC 48 does.
Okay.
Yeah, Gordon does.
Oh,
I can't unmute her. Can you unmute yourself? SFSC 48? You don't want, okay. Gordon.
Gordon, go for it.
Hey, hi. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say, everybody, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about your work. It was really wonderful to see the work and to hear your commentary, and it added so much to it. And it's fabulous work, all of you. And I have a question first for Sylvia. I'm wondering, as you look at your pieces, if you feel, it's really two questions. One, if you feel that there's sort of like an exquisite core in the way that they're pulling together these different segments into the unified piece. And my sense is also that in addition to the way that they situate themselves in space, they seem also to travel in time. And I wonder if that's something that you've experienced from looking at your work, and if you have any thoughts on either of those two things that I'm scratching my head over.
I think we lost Sylvia.
Whoops.
I don't see her. said her connection was bad, so unfortunately,
I'm sorry.
no.
Well, then also for Andrea, I really love your use of symbolism in your work, and it's something also close to my heart that you're pulling from mythology, because for me, all of the myths you referenced, the fates, and you know, in my piece, I was also referencing from Greek mythology, and I'm just wondering, do you often find mythology a kind of a rich source for inspiration in your work, the classical mythologies from different cultures?
I wish I could say I do, but you know, I think everything is like, there's story, we could find reasons. So in one sense, yeah, creation myths, I feel like there's got to be an answer to so many things, and so to create a story or find inspiration in other ones, absolutely, yeah, sure. I need to make some new ones.
Yeah. As a group, I really love them. They read a bit like tarot cards, and they obviously have a meaning. There's enough there that can be grasped, but they also have a wonderful ambiguity too. So they end up being very open-ended.
I did make a set of tarot cards, still available for purchase.
Right. Well, thank you.
Okay.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? Comments? There were a lot of comments in the chat. You can always speak them out loud if you'd like to.
Well, I have other questions too, if
Okay.
no one else
Go for it, Barty.
will say anything. Greg, is Greg still here?
Yes.
Greg, first of all, fabulous piece and tremendous effort in making that happen. It was such an involved process. And I love the sensibility of that work. And in a way, there were two things that I noticed where there was some similarity to work that I've seen of both Bill Morrison and of Bill Viola. Bill Viola in terms of his large installation pieces, where he has people crossing over through the curtain of water from essentially from the sort of the afterlife, or from the non-physical life into the real, and spirits of people visiting from the past. And also from Bill Morrison from Decasia, and how he also sort of is looking back towards these older processes and looking towards the imperfections in the media, and how it is that they can be exploited in a very poignant way in the work. And I felt it just all of that came together so well in that piece. I love that piece.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I was directly influenced by those, but I mean, I think everything that I've done related to video is really influenced by Bill Viola. I think the first piece I ever saw, like video piece that really just like hit me hard, was, I think he did something called Dante's Triptych, where it was, and I saw it at the Tate Modern, where it was 3 images playing together, and the one on the left was a woman like giving like birth, like a natural childbirth, and the one on the right was a woman dying in a hospital bed, and the one in the middle was this person like slowly, like in slow motion, like falling into water, and it's like being submerged, and then all of a sudden the baby comes out, the lady dies, and then the person gets sucked out, and then it starts all over again, you know? So this idea of creating these video pieces that are on a loop like that are very powerful. Like, and then this new piece that I made, it's fun to show it like this, but really I really want it to be like in a gallery as an installation, where you walk in and it's on a loop, and you can just sit there for a couple of minutes and watch it sort of repeat, like this idea going in and out. A lot like that Viola piece with the that naked character with the white makeup going in and out of the water. I think that's the one you're probably referencing, Gordon, where like, and it just like gets repeated over and over again, and it's kind of a haunting sort of like minute or two that just you keep revisiting and revisiting. So I appreciate that you saw that in the work.
Yeah, was the person that you filmed there, is he related to you? Someone's I'm just curious.
No, he's a former student.
Okay.
And I just he has so much character, you know. He's lived a long life, and he has interesting stories. And when I think of somebody who's textured looking and textured personality wise, like, he came to mind. So I thought he'd be the perfect model for that.
Yeah, he sort of was an archetypal father figure, I guess because of his age and because of his weathered look. And I like the way that, you know, his appearing, especially in this time, sort of feels like, you know, someone from an older generation coming in to look at essentially the issues that we're facing now, the challenges that we're facing now, and kind of showing his presence. And it talks both about somehow a strength that he brings, but also it's a warning to say that, hey, you know, this life is very fleeting, and it can come and it can go just as quickly. So I found that aspect of it, at least that's what I read in, and it was kind of chilling in a very good way for me.
Thank you. Yeah, you can, of course, like anything, you can interpret it however you want. I always think of it like in terms of, if you're only out in the light for that little period of time, what are you going to do with that period of time where you're out in the light before you get sucked back into the darkness?
Yeah.
You know, while I'm talking, I had a question for Andrea.
Well, there is another question for you. Just asking how long that photo shoot took and how you approached it.
The photo shoot, it didn't take very long. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do, and I just shot a bunch of variables, like short clips of the guy coming in and out of the darkness. And as far as approaching it, like I knew ahead of time that it was going to be a cyanotype. So it was really important that I had the background black. So instead of overlighting it with a bunch of lights, where like I really did it like very like kind of, you know, low-key lighting with one light off to the side that was just creating this really narrow beam that I did with like barn doors, so that the subject really like came into the light and then moved back out of the light. So it wasn't very difficult to shoot because I already knew exactly how I was going to use it. So I just like created a very simple digital video. Now I saw that was Dave that asked that question. So thanks for asking, Dave.
Thank God part of it was simple, huh?
Yeah. The shooting part's the simple. That's kind of the way I work too. Like, you know, like I don't spend a whole lot of time shooting. I spend a ton of time in the dark room, like making.
Yeah. Did you have a question for somebody, Greg?
I had a question for Andrea. It seems like in the newer work, you've lost those strings of that fate, right? So I'm wondering, like, has something to do with your state of mind right now, that you've kind of lost faith and there's something pulling the strings?
I think they're in free fall. Unfortunately, they're in free fall. I don't have any desire to string them up to anything. And I'm thinking about the latest work is not that. A lot of them were enclosed in these uncomfortable spaces before these. So they were in like pods that had maybe like thorns on the inside, and they're responding to these suits, but they're all in free fall, kind of isolation. And I didn't realize that that's what this is about. I often learn about it afterwards, that, oh, wow, that's a coincidence that was happening.
That's okay though, right? I think that's interesting. Sometimes like I'll say my work is about something, and then after I hear 10 people tell me it's about something else, I'm like, I guess it's about something else.
Yes, that's it.
Why not, right? Who says we have to be stuck to our original idea? It can change. But you have so much symbolism in your work, you can't help but like subconsciously like pick those things out, because they're obviously have a big play. Even if it's not super conscious, like, you know, it's so ripe with all those things. It's pretty amazing. I think
they're really too obvious, but I mean.
No.
Maybe. Anyway.
I have a question for Sean.
Sean?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I was curious. I noticed that obviously your photographs in the installation were all presented kind of differently. And that first one, when you showed the frames, it's a tintype, right, Sean? That the selfie of you?
Yeah.
Oh, Sean. Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
And then you like cut out for a second. So that one's framed, and then you have those other like found tintypes on the wall outside of their protective covering. And I just wondered what inspired you to frame the selfie of yourself versus the kind of raw, more individualized hanging found images that were tintypes around it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I think there's probably a few reasons I chose to do that. The one that comes to mind first was I wanted the work to be somewhat uncomfortable for people when they would view the work and experience the work, that it would challenge what their expectations of what is valuable or what is expected in photography. The whole project, like I find photographic artists and projects interesting when they challenge what I conceived as to be sort of like the status quo in art photography. And so I was really, it seemed like a gesture that turned on its head the idea of a selfie being a fine art piece, and these sort of beautifully all types from the 19th century were more handled with less care and less preciousness. I also just liked visually the composition of how they were ordered as being sort of this grouping. And so, you know, part of it also was just totally visual. I didn't want everything to be framed. And I quite often like photographic work that is not framed at all. A bunch of my work in that project happens to be framed, but I've done other projects and there's artists that I appreciate where photographic framing doesn't happen for whatever various conceptual reasons or material reasons. Also, those little tiny tintypes, you can really see the surface quality of them and the edges better when they're not framed or encased. And so that was another consideration. So people could really see the material qualities of the small tintypes maybe more easily if they are not in a frame. But, you know, I think ultimately it was just to kind of turn on its head the idea of something being precious or not precious, and what could be considered art and why is it considered art, and does framing make it art? What, you know, so some of those considerations were definitely important when I was considering how to frame all the work in that project. So thank you.
Thanks.
It's a great question.
Okay, are there any more questions in the chat, Vic? No, okay. All right, well, we're running a little bit late anyway, so I think it's time to say goodbye. And I just want to thank all of you for attending, and all of you who are presenting for presenting this work. That's so great to get the background behind the images, because I've been staring at those images and I even read your artist statements, but hearing you talk about them just made them come to life and give so much background and depth and feeling and emotion and thought. And so I really want to thank you for sharing all of that with us, because it just makes a huge difference. And since we can't have you talking in the gallery right now, this is great that we can do it online. So I hope to see some of you at our next talk on October 30th at 5 o'clock. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks for coming. Bye.